Her retired rescue dog's perilous fall tests a town's heart, igniting a thrilling fight for survival and justice. Please subscribe to Pause Verve, like and share this video with those who need love. The wind howled through the Cascade Mountains, carrying a sharp bite that sliced through Tom Harper's weathered jacket as he navigated the rugged trail known as Raven's Crest. His hiking boots crunched against loose gravel, each step a testament to the ritual that had kept him grounded since the world turned upside down. At 68, Tom's broad shoulders bore a slight stoop not just from age, but from the weight of grief that had settled deep in his bones after his wife Ellen's sudden death from a heart attack a year prior. His grey hair, now more white than silver, peeked out from under a faded baseball cap, and his blue eyes, once sharp with the vigilance of a firefighter, now carried a quiet sorrow. Beside him bounded Bella, his 7-year-old border collie, her black and white coat a vibrant blur against the greying sky. Retired from her search and rescue days, Bella remained a bundle of energy, her keen eyes scanning the trail, her nose twitching. At every scent, she was more than a companion, she was Tom's lifeline. Her eager barks and playful nudges filling the silence Ellen's absence had carved into their small home in Willow Creek. Their daily hikes through the mountains had become a sacred routine, a way for Tom to feel the pulse of life beyond the empty rooms and unopened mail that awaited him in town. On this late autumn afternoon, the trail was steeper than usual, the air thick with the scent of pine and the metallic tang of an approaching storm. Bella darted ahead, her ears perked as she chased the faint rustle of a squirrel through the underbrush. Tom smiled faintly, his weathered face softening at her boundless joy, a rare moment where the ache in his chest eased. He adjusted the straps of his lightweight backpack, which held a water bottle, a bag of trail mix, and a small worn photograph of Ellen, her smile frozen in time from a hike they'd taken years ago. He often pulled it out at scenic overlooks, speaking softly to her, as if she were still beside him, marveling at the view. The sky darkened abruptly, clouds churning with a ferocity that caught Tom off guard. He glanced at his watch, frowning, as the forecast had promised clear skies for another few hours. A distant rumble of thunder shattered the quiet, and Bella's ears flicked back, her body tensing as she paused mid-stride. Tom's heart quickened, a firefighter's instinct kicking in as he sensed the storm's sudden menace. Before he could call her back, a jagged bolt of lightning split a nearby cedar, the deafening crack echoing through the ravine like a gunshot. The air sizzled with ozone, and Bella startled, her instincts overriding years of disciplined training. She bolted into the underbrush, her form a fleeting shadow against the onslaught of rain that began to pour. Tom's voice caught in his throat as he shouted her name, the sound swallowed by the storm's roar. Rain turned to sleet, pelting his unprotected face as he stumbled after her, the trail transforming into a slick, muddy quagmire beneath his boots. His heart pounded not just from exertion, but from a rising panic as he caught a glimpse of Bella near the ravine's edge, her paws slipping on loose shale. She scrambled for purchase, her amber eyes wide with fear mirroring the terror gripping Tom's chest. In a heartbeat she was gone, her desperate yelp piercing the storm as she vanished over the cliff into the shadowed depths below. Tom lunged forward, dropping to his knees at the edge, his hands gripping wet, jagged rock as he peered into the abyss. The ravine plunged 150 feet to a jagged floor of rocks and a shallow stream, its waters churning white against the storm's fury. His breath came in ragged gasps, the cold air burning his lungs as he called Bella's name again and again, the echo mocking his desperation. The storm raged on, indifferent to his cries, its relentless downpour blurring his vision as sleet stung his skin. Bella was more than a dog, she was his family, his reason to keep going through the endless nights when grief threatened to drown him. Memories flooded unbidden Bella, as a puppy tumbling over her own paws in their backyard, Ellen laughing as she tossed a ball for the first time. Bella during her search and rescue training, her focus unwavering as she navigated rubble to find a mock victim. Bella lying at Tom's feet by the fireplace, her steady breathing a quiet comfort as he read Ellen's favorite novels aloud after her passing. Each memory tightened the knot in his chest, a visceral reminder of what he stood to lose. He forced himself to stand, his legs trembling, as he scanned the ravine for any sign of movement. The fading light made it nearly impossible to see details, but he refused to believe she was gone. Bella was a survivor, her courage proven in countless missions, where she'd found lost hikers or stranded climbers in these very mountains. She had to be alive, clinging to a ledge, or caught in some crevice, waiting for him to find her. Tom's hands shook as he fumbled for the flashlight in his backpack, its weak beam cutting through the rain, but revealing nothing but slick rock and distant water. The storm's ferocity showed no sign of abating, and he knew he couldn't stay exposed much longer. Hypothermia was a real risk, his years as a firefighter reminding him of the body's limits, even as his heart screamed to keep searching. He forced himself to think logically, to channel the discipline that had carried him through decades of emergencies. Bella was trained to hunker down in adverse conditions. She might be injured, but she was smart enough to seek shelter. If he could get help organize a proper search, they could reach her before it was too late. Reluctantly, he turned from the edge, his boots slipping as he retraced his steps down the trail. Each step felt like a betrayal, a failure to protect the one being who had never left his side. The descent was treacherous, the trail now a river of mud that threatened to send him sliding. He moved as quickly as he dared, his flashlight bouncing wildly as he navigated roots and rocks. By the time he reached his truck parked at the trailhead, darkness had fully descended the storm, a relentless force that rattled the vehicle's windows. Tom sat behind the wheel, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he fought to steady his breathing. He couldn't go home, not yet. He drove to the Willow Creek fire station, a place where he'd spent 40 years of his life, now a hub of younger faces who still called him Captain out of respect. The station was quiet, the night shift. Crew startled by his soaked, disheveled appearance. He explained in halting words what had happened, his voice breaking, as he described Bella's fall. The crew sprang into action, contacting the local search and rescue team and promising to mobilize at first light when the storm was expected to break. Tom nodded, grateful but hollow, his mind still on the ravine's edge, where Bella's yelp echoed in his memory. He declined their offer to drive him home instead, returning to his truck where he sat staring at the rain-streaked windshield. Bella was out there alone, possibly hurt, and he was powerless to reach her. The thought was unbearable, a fresh wound layered over the still raw grief of losing Ellen. He pulled out the photograph of her, its edges worn from constant handling, and traced her smile with a trembling finger. He didn't know how to face another loss, not when Bella had been the one to pull him through the darkest days. The night stretched on, endless and unforgiving, as Tom waited for dawn, clinging to the hope that Bella's strength would carry her through until he could bring her home. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time Tom Harper pulled away from the Willow Creek fire station, his truck's headlights cutting through the pre-dawn mist that clung to the Cascade Mountains. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as he navigated the winding road back to his small cedar-shingled house on the edge of town. The familiar sight of the porch light, left on out of habit, did little to ease the hollow ache in his chest. Bella's absence was a physical weight, her usual enthusiastic greeting replaced by an oppressive silence that echoed the void left by Ellen's passing a year ago. At 68, Tom was no stranger to loss. His 40 years as a firefighter had taught him to compartmentalize grief, to focus on the next actionable step. But this was different. Bella, his 7-year-old border collie, wasn't just a pet. She was his partner, his reason to rise each morning, her steady presence a bridge to the life he'd shared with Ellen. He pushed open the front door, the creak of the hinges unnaturally loud in the empty house. Bella's water bowl sat untouched by the kitchen counter. Her favorite squeaky toy, a faded red ball, lay abandoned in the hallway. Tom's throat tightened as he set his soaked jacket over a chair, unable to bring himself to fill the bowl or move the toy. He sank onto the couch, his wet clothes clinging to his skin, and stared at the framed photo on the mantel, Ellen and Bella, at a community picnic 2 summers ago, both radiating joy. Sleep was impossible, his mind replaying the moment Bella vanished. Over the ravine's edge, her desperate yelp, a sound he couldn't unhear. He forced himself to stand, moving to the kitchen to brew coffee, more out of habit than need. The storm had left the town of Willow Creek, Washington, a community of 2,500, souls in a state of quiet disarray. Fallen branches littered the streets, and power flickered in some neighborhoods, but Tom barely noticed. His world had narrowed to the singular goal of finding Bella. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the windows, He gathered supplies. A fresh flashlight, extra batteries, a first aid kit, and Bella's spare leash, its familiar weight, a small comfort. He printed a stack of missing dog flyers at the local copy shop, his hands trembling as he selected a recent photo of Bella, her intelligent eyes bright, her tongue lolling in a happy pant. The shop owner, a kind-eyed woman named Ruth, promised to post the flyer on the community board, her voice gentle as she recalled Bella's heroism during a forest fire rescue 2 years prior. Tom nodded, unable to muster more than a gruff thank you, his focus already shifting to the day ahead. By sunrise, he was back at the Raven's Crest trailhead, joined by a small group of volunteers from the fire station and the local search and rescue team. The storm had left the trail treacherous, mud and debris making every step a challenge. Tom led the way, his firefighter's training guiding his movements even as his heart raced with every glimpse of the ravine below. The team called Bella's name, their voices echoing off the wet rock, while Tom clutched her squeaky toy, squeezing it periodically in hopes the familiar sound would draw her out. Hours passed with no sign, no answering bark, no flash of black and white fur. The team's leader, a wiry man named Hank, urged Tom to rest, warning that exhaustion could lead to mistakes, but Tom pressed on, his desperation growing with each empty ledge and shadowed crevice. The ravine's depth and inaccessibility made a full descent too dangerous without specialized equipment, which Hank promised to secure by the next day. As the sun climbed higher, Tom's hope began to fray, replaced by a gnawing certainty that Bella was hurt or worse. He pushed the thought away, focusing instead on stapling flyers to trailhead signs and nearby trees, each one a plea to the universe to bring her back. Back in Willow Creek, news of Bella's disappearance spread quickly, the town's tight-knit nature amplifying both support and skepticism. At the Main Street diner, where Tom stopped for a quick coffee, locals whispered over their breakfast plates. Some offered sympathy, recalling Bella's search and rescue feats, while others questioned the wisdom of risking lives and resources for a dog. Tom overheard a gruff voice at the counter, muttering about the cost of rescue operations, money better spent on road repairs after the storm. He clenched his jaw, choosing not to engage his energy reserved for the search. The diner's owner, a stout woman named Mabel, slid a Togo cup across the counter, refusing his payment, her eyes soft with understanding. She'd lost her own dog to old age the previous winter and knew the pain of an empty house. Tom returned to his truck, the flyers now plastered across town bulletin boards, telephone poles and shop windows. He drove back to the trailhead, unwilling to stay away for long, joining another round of volunteers who combed the upper trails. The day stretched into a blur of mud-soaked boots, aching muscles and fading light. By dusk, the search was called off, until morning, the team citing dangerous conditions and the need for better gear. Tom lingered at the ravine's edge, his flashlight beam swallowed by the darkness below. He squeezed Bella's toy one last time, the squeak a futile gesture that broke something inside him. The drive home was silent, his truck's radio off, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of gravel under the tires. Willow Creek settled into its evening rhythm, families gathering for dinner, porch lights glowing against the damp chill. But Tom felt detached, as if the town's warmth belonged to someone else's life. He parked in his driveway, staring at the house that had once been a home filled with Ellen's laughter and Bella's playful chaos. Inside, he left the porch light on a beacon for a miracle he wasn't sure he believed in. He heated a can of soup, eating mechanically, his eyes fixed on Bella's empty bed in the corner. The community's response began to take shape in small ways. A neighbor dropped off a casserole with a note promising to join the search at dawn. The local elementary school teacher sent an email suggesting her students make get-well cards for Bella, a project to lift Tom's spirits. Yet alongside the kindness came the undercurrent of doubt. At a makeshift town meeting in the community center, some residents voiced concerns about the practicality of the search. A local mechanic argued that the ravine's depth and the storm's damage made rescue unlikely, his tone not unkind, but pragmatic. Others countered, citing Bella's service to the town, her role in saving lives during wildfires and floods. Tom didn't attend, too consumed by his own vigil, but heard about the debate through a firefighter friend. The division stung, though he understood the logic. Resources were tight, and the mountains unforgiving. Still, Bella wasn't just any dog. She was a hero, a symbol of resilience and loyalty. As night fell, Tom sat on the couch, the weight of the day pressing him into the cushions. He pulled Ellen's photo from his pocket, speaking softly to her as he often did when the loneliness grew too heavy. He told her about the storm, the search, the flyers, his voice cracking as he admitted his fear that Bella was gone. The house remained. Silent, no answering bark, no patter of paws. Tom closed his eyes, willing himself to hold on to hope, knowing that dawn would bring another chance to find her. The community's support, however tentative, gave him a flicker of strength, a reminder that he wasn't entirely alone in this fight. The dawn broke over Willow Creek. With a fragile clarity, the Cascade Mountains bathed in a soft pink glow that belied the turmoil of the past 2 days. Tom Harper stood at his kitchen window, coffee untouched, as he stared at the empty yard where Bella used to chase her red ball. At 68, his weathered face carried new lines etched by sleepless nights, and the raw fear of losing his border collie, his last tether to the life he'd built with his late wife Ellen. The house was too quiet, the absence of Bella's eager. Morning barks a reminder of the ravine's cruel theft. Tom's blue eyes, once sharp from years as a firefighter, now dulled by grief, scanned the horizon as if willing Bella to appear. He was a man of routine forged by 40 years of service, rising before dawn, checking equipment, facing the unpredictability of emergencies with steady hands. But this emergency was personal, and his hands trembled as he gathered Bella's leash and a stack of fresh flyers, determined to return to Raven's Crest. Willow Creek, a town of 2,500 nestled between rugged peaks, was stirring, neighbors emerging. To clear storm debris, their conversations hushed with the news of Bella's fall. The community was a patchwork of loyalty and pragmatism, where casseroles arrived during hardship, but opinions could divide like the ravine itself. Tom's resolve was unshaken by the murmurs of doubt he'd overheard at the diner. His focus singular: Bella was out there, and he would find her. As he stepped onto his porch, a neighbor waved, offering to join the morning search, a small act that anchored Tom's wavering hope. The town's response was beginning to coalesce around him, and with it came the people whose lives Bella had touched, each bringing their own reasons to fight for her survival. Dr. Emily Carter arrived at her veterinary clinic, a converted barn on the outskirts of Willow Creek, her silver-streaked brown hair pulled into a practical bun. At 45, she was a relative newcomer, having moved to town 6 years ago after a messy divorce left her seeking a quieter life. Her hazel eyes, perpetually tired from long hours, reflected a stubborn determination that had earned her both respect and occasional friction from locals. The clinic was her sanctuary, its walls lined with photos of animals she'd saved, often against daunting odds. Emily had a reputation for taking on cases others deemed hopeless, a trait that had drawn desperate pet owners from across the county. She'd met Bella during her search and rescue days, marveling at the dog's instincts when she'd located a missing child in a dense forest 3 years prior. When news of Bella's fall reached her late the previous night, Emily had stayed, up reviewing trauma protocols, preparing her small staff for the possibility of treating severe injuries. She didn't know if Bella was alive, but she knew Tom Harper, a man whose quiet dignity reminded her of her own father, and she couldn't let him face this alone. By mid-morning, she'd cleared her schedule, redirecting routine appointments to a colleague in the next town, her focus now on supporting the search effort. Jake Sullivan was already at the Raven's Crest trailhead when Tom arrived, his rugged frame leaning against his beat-up Jeep. At 30, Jake's sun-bleached hair and calloused hands spoke of a life spent in the mountains, guiding tourists through the Cascades, trails, and rivers. He'd grown up in Willow Creek, exploring every ridge and gully, a knowledge that made him invaluable to the search. 2 years ago, during a wildfire that threatened the town, Jake had been trapped in a collapsed sheet, smoke choking his lungs, his radio dead. Bella, then at the height of her search and rescue career, had found him, her insistent barks leading rescuers to his location just as his strength failed. Jake had never forgotten the feel of her wet nose nudging his hand, or the sight of Tom's relieved face when they emerged from the smoke. He owed Bella his life, a debt that drove him to join the search without hesitation. Jake's easy grin masked a deeper resolve as he clapped Tom on the shoulder, promising to scour every inch of the ravine. He carried a backpack stuffed with climbing gear and a photo of Bella taped to his water bottle, a talisman to keep him focused. Margaret Hayes watched the morning's activity from the window of her stately Victorian home on Maple Lane, her pearl necklace catching the light as she sipped chamomile tea. At 72, she was Willow Creek's wealthiest resident, her late husband's logging empire, leaving her a fortune that funded her elegant lifestyle. Few knew the truth behind her impeccable facade. Her savings were dwindling, eroded by poor investments and the cost of maintaining appearances. Margaret's silver hair was always perfectly styled, her dresses tailored, but her bank statements told a story of mounting debt. She'd never met Tom Harper formally, their worlds separated by social circles, but she knew Bella's story. 3 years ago, during a flood that swept through the town's lowlands, Bella had alerted residents to rising waters, barking frantically at doors until families evacuated. Margaret had watched from her hilltop home, safe but shaken as Bella's efforts saved lives, including that of her groundskeeper's daughter. The memory lingered, a quiet debt she felt, but never voiced. When she heard of Bella's fall through the town's grapevine, Margaret felt a stir of purpose, something she hadn't experienced since her husband's death a decade ago. She began making discreet calls, arranging to fund specialized rescue equipment, though she insisted on anonymity, her pride as much a shield as her wealth once was. As the morning unfolded, these 4 lives began to intertwine, drawn together by Bella's plight. Tom returned to the trailhead, his heart heavy but bolstered by the volunteers who joined him. The search team now included seasoned climbers and local firefighters, their radios crackling with updates as they fanned out across the upper trails. Emily arrived with medical supplies, offering to set up a triage station at the trailhead in case Bella was found injured. She spoke with Tom briefly, her calm professionalism a counterpoint to his raw emotion, assuring him her clinic was ready for any scenario. Jake took charge of a smaller group venturing closer to the ravine's edge, his knowledge of the terrain guiding their movements. He shared stories of Bella's past rescues, keeping morale high even as the hours yielded no results. Margaret, meanwhile, drove to the community center, dropping off a check for the search effort, her elegant handwriting masking the sacrifice it represented. She lingered at the center, overhearing debates about the search's cost versus its value, her lips tightening at the skepticism but saying nothing. The town itself was a character in this unfolding drama, its 2,500 residents, a mix of old-timers and newcomers, bound by shared history and occasional grudges. Willow Creek's main street, lined with a diner, a hardware store and a small library, buzzed with talk of Bella. At the elementary school, children drew pictures of the border collie, their teacher planning to deliver them to Tom as a gesture of hope. The diner's donation jar filled with coins and small bills, each clink a vote of confidence in Bella's survival. Yet the skepticism persisted, a local council member questioning the use of municipal resources for a dog, prompting heated replies from those who saw Bella as a hero. Tom felt the town's pulse, its support and its doubts, but kept his focus on the ravine. By afternoon, the search had covered miles of trails with no sign of Bella, the team's optimism tempered by the reality of the terrain. Tom's body ached, his knees protesting the relentless pace, but he refused to stop. Emily watched him with concern, urging him to hydrate, while Jake scouted a new section of the ravine, his binoculars trained on distant ledges. Margaret returned home, her check delivered, but her mind restless as she considered further ways to help. The day ended with the team regrouping at the trailhead, their faces etched with fatigue, but not defeat. Tom stood apart, clutching Bella's leash, his eyes fixed on the ravine as the sun dipped below the peaks. The community's efforts, the characters now converging around Bella's story, set the stage for a fight that would test their resolve and redefine their bonds. The third morning dawned crisp over Willow Creek, the Cascade Mountains gleaming under a sky scrubbed clean by the storm's departure. Tom Harper stood at the Raven's Crest trailhead, his breath visible in the chilly air, his weathered hands clutching a thermos of coffee that had gone cold. At 68, his body protested the sleepless nights and relentless searching, but his resolve burned brighter than ever. Bella, his 7-year-old border collie, was still out there, her absence a wound that deepened with each passing hour. The ravine where she'd fallen, a 150-foot chasm of jagged rock and shallow stream, haunted his thoughts, her desperate yelp replaying like a cruel loop. Willow Creek, a town of 2,500 nestled in Washington's rugged embrace, buzzed with quiet determination. As volunteers gathered their faces, a mix of hope and grim focus. Tom's flyers plastered across telephone poles and shop windows had sparked a response the community's heart stirred by the memory of Bella's search and rescue heroics. Dr. Emily Carter arrived with medical supplies, her veterinary clinic's logo on her jacket, a beacon of preparedness. Jake Sullivan, the 30-year-old hiking guide, was already organizing ropes and harnesses, his sun-bleached hair tucked under a cap, his eyes scanning the ravine for any sign. Margaret Hayes, though absent from the trailhead, had ensured a delivery of specialized climbing gear, her anonymous donation a silent pledge to Bella's cause. The search team, now bolstered by experienced climbers from a neighboring county, fanned out across the upper trails, their radios crackling with updates. Tom moved with them, his firefighter's instincts guiding his steps, though his heart ached with every empty ledge. The terrain was unforgiving, the storm's aftermath, leaving slick shale and uprooted trees that slowed their progress. By mid-morning, the team had covered familiar ground with no results, the silence of the ravine mocking their efforts. Tom squeezed Bella's squeaky toy, a red ball he'd carried since the first day, its sound a futile call that nonetheless kept him anchored. Jake led a smaller group closer to the ravine's edge, his knowledge of the Cascades a lifeline in the sprawling wilderness. He paused at a lookout point, raising binoculars to scan the opposite side of the gorge where the trail curved toward a sheer drop. His breath caught as he spotted movement, a faint flash of black and white on a narrow ledge about 150 feet below the cliff's rim. He adjusted the focus, his heart pounding, as the shape resolved into Bella pacing frantically, her coat matted with mud, her body low to the rock. She was alive, her faint barks barely audible over the wind, but unmistakable to Jake, who knew her voice from the wildfire rescue 2 years ago. He shouted for Tom, his voice cutting through the team's chatter, drawing them to the lookout. Tom's legs felt unsteady as he raised his own binoculars, his hands trembling as he confirmed Jake's sighting. Bella was there, her amber eyes catching the sunlight as she looked up, her barks growing more insistent. The ledge was precarious, barely wider than her body, surrounded by loose rock that threatened to give way. Tom's relief crashed against a wave of fear, the distance and instability, making rescue a daunting challenge. He called her name, his voice hoarse but steady, and Bella's ears perked her tail, giving a weak wag that nearly broke him. The team erupted into action, Hank, the search leader, coordinating with the climbers to assess the ledge's stability. Emily knelt beside Tom, her hazel eyes scanning the ravine as she calculated the medical implications of Bella's condition. Dehydration, exposure, possible fractures, she murmured, listing potential injuries, but her tone carried a cautious optimism. Jake was already on his radio relaying coordinates to the base camp, where additional gear was being prepared. The discovery transformed the morning's fatigue into a surge of purpose, the volunteers' faces alight with renewed hope. Tom watched Bella through the binoculars, his chest tight as she shifted on the ledge, her movements sluggish but deliberate. She was a fighter, her search and rescue training evident in her refusal to succumb to the cold or hunger. Memories flooded Tom, Bella navigating a collapsed building to find a trapped hiker, her focus unwavering, Bella curling up beside Ellen on the couch, her warmth a comfort during Ellen's final months. He whispered to her across the distance, promising to bring her home, his words more a prayer than a vow. The team's initial plan was to rappel down to the ledge, but Hank's assessment was grim. The surrounding rock was too unstable, a direct approach risking a collapse that could send Bella plummeting further. They needed a different strategy, one that might involve a helicopter or a lateral approach from a lower trail. Jake volunteered to scout a game trail that switchbacked toward the ravine's floor, his familiarity with the area a critical asset. Emily set up a makeshift triage station at the trailhead, unpacking splints, fluids, and warming blankets. Her clinic's resources stretched, but sufficient for immediate care. Margaret's donation had included a portable stretcher, designed for animal rescues its arrival, a quiet miracle that bolstered the team's confidence. Back in Willow Creek, news of Bella's sighting spread like wildfire, the diner's phone ringing, with offers of help. The local reporter Clara Nguyen arrived at the trailhead, her notebook open, as she interviewed volunteers, her questions sharp but empathetic. She'd covered Bella's past rescues and saw in Tom's story a narrative that could unite the town. The community's response was mixed. Some residents doubled their donations to the diner's jar, while others at the community center debated the risks of a high-stakes rescue. A retired logger argued that the ravine's dangers outweighed the odds, his voice carrying the weight of practicality. But Mabel, the diner owner, countered, with stories of Bella's service, her words swaying a few skeptics. Tom felt the town's pulse through these fragments of conversation, but his focus remained on Bella. The day stretched into afternoon, the team's efforts hampered by the need for precision. Jake returned from his scouting mission, reporting a possible access point, but it would require hours of clearing debris. Hank secured a promise of helicopter support for the next morning weather, permitting a development that lifted Tom's spirits. Emily stayed close, offering Tom water and quiet. Reassurance, her presence a steady anchor. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the ravine, Bella's barks grew fainter, her energy visibly waning. Tom refused to leave the lookout, his binoculars trained on her every movement. He spoke to her softly, recounting their hikes, the way she'd leap into streams after sticks, the way Ellen would laugh at her muddy paws. The volunteers worked until dusk, their headlamps bobbing in the twilight as they prepared for the next day's push. Tom finally agreed to return home. At Emily's insistence, his body exhausted, but his mind racing. The drive back to Willow Creek was quiet, the town's lights a faint comfort against the vast darkness of the mountains. At home, Tom left Bella's bowl filled a gesture of hope he clung to, despite the odds. The community's support now galvanized. By the sighting gave him strength, but the image of Bella on that crumbling ledge fueled both his determination and his dread. Clara's article in the evening edition of the Willow Creek Chronicle detailed the discovery, framing Bella as a symbol of resilience, a call to action that drew more volunteers to the trailhead's roster. Margaret read the piece from her Victorian, home, her fingers tracing her pearls, as she considered further ways to help her own sacrifices, a private act of redemption. Jake spent the evening mapping the ravine's lower trails, his debt to Bella driving him to exhaustion. Emily reviewed her clinic's inventory, mentally preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. Tom lay awake, the silence of his house, deafening as he waited for dawn, the flicker of hope now a flame that refused to die. The fourth morning in Willow Creek broke with a restless energy, the Cascade Mountains standing sentinel as the town of 2,500 rallied around the faint hope of Bella's survival. Tom Harper stood at the Raven's Crest trailhead, his 68-year-old frame rigid with determination, despite the ache in his joints from days of relentless searching. His grey hair was damp with morning mist, his blue eyes fixed on the ravine, where his border collie Bella clung to life on a crumbling ledge 150 feet below. The image of her matted black and white coat and weak barks haunted him, a constant reminder of the yelp that had pierced the storm when she fell. Tom's hands gripped Bella's red, squeaky toy, its familiar weight, a talisman against despair. Willow Creek was no stranger to hardship, its residents bound by a history of wildfires, floods, and the quiet struggles of small-town life. But Bella's plight had ignited something deeper, a collective resolve to save one of their own. Tom's flyers now blanketed the town, their bold letters, and Bella's joyful photo stirring memories of her search and rescue days. The community's pulse quickened as volunteers poured into the trailhead, their pickup trucks and SUVs lining the gravel lot. Dr. Emily Carter transformed her veterinary clinic into a command center, her staff organizing supplies, while she coordinated with the search team, her hazel eyes sharp despite sleepless nights. Jake Sullivan, the 30-year-old hiking guide, mapped out new routes, his knowledge of the Cascades, guiding the climbers who arrived with ropes and pulleys funded by an anonymous donor, later revealed to be Margaret Hayes. Margaret herself remained in the background, her elegant Victorian home a quiet hub where she made calls to secure additional resources, her pearl necklace a constant as she navigated her dwindling finances. The town's mobilization was a tapestry of action and emotion woven from shared history and individual debts to Bella. At the Main Street diner, Mabel, the owner, set up a donation jar that clinked with coins and crumpled bills, each contribution a testament to Bella's impact. Regulars swapped stories over coffee, recalling how Bella had found a lost camper during a blizzard or alerted a family to a gas leak in their home. The diner's walls now displayed children's drawings of Bella, her black and white fur rendered in vibrant crayons, a project spearheaded by the elementary school teacher to lift Tom's spirits. Clara Nguyen, the local reporter, scribbled notes for the Willow Creek Chronicle, her articles amplifying Bella's story beyond the town's borders, drawing inquiries from regional news outlets. The community center became a makeshift headquarters, where volunteers sorted supplies from blankets to bottled water, their chatter a mix of optimism and practical concern. Not everyone was convinced the effort was warranted, a tension that surfaced at the center's morning briefing. A local council member, a stern man named Harold, voiced doubts about the cost of helicopter support, arguing that municipal funds should prioritize human needs like storm-damaged roads. His words sparked a heated response from a firefighter who'd worked with Bella during a flood rescue, her barks leading them to stranded families just in time. Tom stood at the edge of the crowd, his jaw tight as he listened, unwilling to engage in the debate. His focus was singular. Bella was his family, her loyalty unmatched, and he'd move mountains to bring her home. Emily sensed his strain, pulling him aside to offer a granola bar and a quiet word, her veterinary expertise grounding her empathy. She'd seen owners face impossible odds and knew Tom's strength came from love, not logic, a force she respected, even as she prepared for grim possibilities. Jake, meanwhile, led a team to clear the game trail he'd scouted the previous day, their machetes and shovels carving a path toward the ravine's lower reaches. His muscles ached, but his debt to Bella from the wildfire rescue 2 years ago drove him forward, her image taped to his water bottle, a constant motivator. Margaret's contribution arrived mid-morning, a delivery truck unloading a high-tech animal, rescue harness and a portable winch system. The equipment's arrival drew murmurs of awe from the team, Hank, the search leader, explaining its potential to safely extract Bella if they could reach her ledge. Margaret watched from a distance, her Mercedes parked discreetly down the road, her heart lifting at the team's renewed vigor, even as her bank account dwindled. She'd sold a cherished antique brooch the previous day to cover the cost, her pride swallowing the loss, as she thought of Bella's role in the flood 3 years ago. The town's efforts extended beyond the trailhead's small acts of support, rippling through daily life. The hardware store owner donated flashlights and batteries, his usual gruff demeanor softened by memories of Bella's service. The library set up a bulletin board for search updates, its surface soon covered with notes of encouragement and photos of Bella in her rescue vest. At the elementary school, children wrote letters to Tom, their misspelled words and earnest hopes, say balm for his fraying spirit. Clara's latest article hit the stands, framing Bella as a symbol of Willow Creek's resilience, a narrative that resonated with residents weary of division. Yet the skepticism persisted, a vocal minority questioning. The resources poured into one dog. At the community center, Harold's allies argued that the helicopter slated for dawn could be better used for infrastructure surveys, their logic clashing with the emotional weight of Bella's legacy. Mabel countered at the diner, her voice carrying over the clatter of plates as she recounted Bella's rescues, her words swaying a few doubters. Tom felt the town's divide, but refused to let it deter him, returning to the lookout point where Bella had been spotted. He raised his binoculars, his heart leaping as he saw her still moving, though her barks were weaker, her body pressed against the rock for warmth. The ledge's instability was a constant threat, loose shale shifting with her every step. Jake joined him, reporting progress on the game trail, but warning that it wouldn't be ready until evening. Hank confirmed the helicopter's availability, weather permitting a plan forming to airlift Bella if ground access failed. Emily stayed at the triage station, her hands steady as she prepared IV fluids and painkillers, her mind racing through trauma scenarios. The day wore on the team's efforts, a relentless push against time and terrain. Volunteers rotated shifts, their faces etched with fatigue, but lit with purpose. Tom moved between groups, stapling fresh flyers to trees, his voice hoarse from calling. Bella's name. Jake's team made headway on the trail, their shovels ringing against rock as they carved a path. Margaret visited the community center, dropping off a tray of sandwiches, her presence a quiet reassurance, though her thoughts lingered on her looming financial reckoning. Clara interviewed volunteers, her questions, uncovering stories of Bella's impact, a tapestry of gratitude that filled her notebook. As dusk fell, the team gathered at the trailhead, their headlamps flickering like fireflies. Tom stood apart, his binoculars trained on Bella's ledge, where her movements had slowed her strength, visibly fading. He spoke to her across the distance, promising Ellen was watching, promising he'd never give up. The community's mobilization had transformed a solitary loss into a shared mission, each act of support, a thread in the fabric of hope. Emily packed. Up her station, her eyes meeting Tom's with unspoken resolve. Jake plotted the next day's routes, his fingers tracing maps by flashlight. Margaret returned home, her checkbook lighter, but her spirit buoyed by the town's unity. The night settled over Willow Creek, the stars bright above the ravine, where Bella waited her fate tied to the collective will of those who refused to let her go. The fifth morning over Willow Creek shimmered with a brittle hope, the Cascade Mountains glowing under a sky streaked with high clouds that promised fair weather for the helicopter's arrival. Tom Harper stood at the Raven's Crest trailhead, his 68-year-old frame taut with anticipation, his weathered hands clutching Bella's red, squeaky toy as if it could summon her from the ravine's depths. His gray hair was tucked under a faded cap, his blue eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, but burning with a resolve that had carried him through 40 years as a firefighter. Bella, his 7-year-old border collie, was still alive on a crumbling ledge, 150 feet below her faint barks, a lifeline that tethered Tom to hope. The image of her matted black and white coat, her amber eyes dulled by exhaustion, haunted him, her yelp from the storm's chaos, a sound etched into his soul. Willow Creek, a town of 2,500, nestled in Washington's rugged embrace, pulsed with collective effort, its residents converging on the trailhead in pickups and SUVs, their faces a mix of determination and quiet dread. The community's mobilization had transformed Bella's plight into a shared mission, fueled by memories of her search and rescue heroics and the flyers Tom had plastered across town. Dr. Emily Carter was already at her triage station, her veterinary clinic's supplies spread across a folding table, her silver-streaked hair pulled back as she checked IV fluids and splints. At 45, her hazel eyes carried the weight of countless emergencies, but her hands moved with practiced calm, preparing for Bella's potential injuries. Jake Sullivan, the 30-year-old hiking guide, coordinated with the climbers, his sun-bleached hair damp with sweat, as he tested the ropes and harnesses funded by Margaret Hayes's discreet donation. Margaret herself lingered at the community center, her pearl necklace a constant, as she handed out coffee to volunteers, her elegant facade masking the financial strain of her contributions. The search team, now a well-oiled unit of local firefighters, experienced climbers and newly arrived specialists from a neighboring county, gathered under Hank's leadership, their radios crackling with final checks. The helicopter was due at dawn, its rotor blades a promised lifeline, to reach Bella's unstable ledge, but ground efforts continued in parallel with Jake's cleared game trail offering a secondary approach. Tom moved among the volunteers, his firefighter's instincts sharp as he scanned the ravine, his heart racing at every distant sound that might be Bella's bark. The team's plan was twofold: a helicopter extraction if the ledge held, or a ground rescue via the game trail if aerial. Access proved too risky. The morning air was crisp, the scent of pine mingling with the tang of wet earth as the team fanned out their headlamps fading in the growing light. Jake led a group to the game trail, their boots crunching on freshly cleared gravel as they descended toward the ravine's floor. Emily stayed at the trailhead, her triage station, a beacon of readiness, while Tom joined Hank at the lookout point, his binoculars trained on Bella's ledge. Through the lenses, he saw her pacing her movements, sluggish, her body pressed against the rock for stability. Her barks were weaker now, barely carrying across the gorge, but her persistence fueled Tom's resolve. He whispered to her, recounting their hikes with Ellen, the way Bella would leap into streams, her muddy paws earning mock scolds. The helicopter's distant thrum broke his reverie, its sleek form cresting the ridge as volunteers cheered. Hank coordinated with the pilot, a seasoned rescue operator, who maneuvered the craft above the ravine, its downdraft stirring dust and loose shale. A climber named Sarah rigged with a harness, and the animal rescue stretcher descended on a cable, her movements precise despite the wind. Tom's breath caught as Sarah neared the ledge, Bella's ears perking at the noise, her body tensing with confusion. The team held a collective silence, their radios muted, as Sarah signaled her position. She was 30 feet above Bella when disaster struck the ledge, already weakened by the storm, and Bella's pacing gave way with a sickening crack. Rocks tumbled into the abyss, Bella's desperate scrabble failing as she slid toward the edge. Tom's shout was drowned by the helicopter's roar, his binoculars tracking Bella's fall as she plummeted 20 feet before landing in the shallow stream below. The water softened her impact, but her body lay still, her black and white fur stark against the grey rocks. Sarah radioed frantically, urging the pilot to reposition, but Jake was already moving, abandoning the game trail to scramble down a steeper, uncharted path. His climbing gear clinked against his belt, his heart pounding with memories of Bella's wildfire rescue 2 years ago, when she'd saved his life. He ignored Hank's shouts to weight his focus, singular. Bella was down there, and he owed her everything. The ravine's floor was a maze of boulders and twisted roots, the stream's icy water soaking Jake's boots as he reached Bella. She was alive, her chest rising faintly, her eyes half open, clouded with pain. Blood matted her fur, a hind leg bent at an unnatural angle, but her tail twitched weakly as Jake knelt beside her. He spoke softly, calling her name as he assessed her condition, his hands gentle despite the urgency. The helicopter hovered above, unable to land in the narrow gorge, but Sarah descended to assist, passing down the rescue stretcher. Jake and Sarah worked quickly, securing Bella, her soft whines piercing the air as they stabilized her leg. The stretcher's straps were tight, but gentle, Margaret's donated equipment proving its worth. Tom watched through binoculars, his chest tight with fear and gratitude, as Jake cradled Bella's head during the ascent. The helicopter lifted them clear of the ravine, its cable taut as it ferried Bella and Sarah to the trailhead. Emily was ready, her triage station transformed into an emergency bay as the stretcher touched down. Volunteers formed a perimeter, keeping the growing crowd at bay, their murmurs a mix of relief and concern. Tom sprinted to Bella's side, his knees buckling as he saw her battered form, her breathing shallow but steady. Emily's hands moved with clinical precision, cutting away matted fur to expose wounds, checking for fractures, her voice calm as she directed her assistant to start an IV. Bella's amber eyes flickered toward Tom, a faint recognition that shattered his composure. He knelt beside her, his hand resting on her head, whispering promises to bring her home. Jake stood nearby, his clothes torn and soaked, his face streaked with mud and tears. He'd risked everything to reach Bella, his debt repaid in that frantic descent. Margaret arrived at the trailhead, her Mercedes pulling up discreetly as she joined. The crowd, her eyes fixed on Bella with a quiet intensity. Clara Nguyen scribbled notes, her camera capturing the scene for the Chronicle, her questions held for later as she sensed the moment's weight. The community's response surged, donations pouring into the diner's jar, volunteers offering to drive supplies to Emily's clinic. Yet doubts lingered, some onlookers whispering about the cost of treating a dog so gravely injured. Harold, the council member, stood at the edge of the crowd, his arms crossed, his skepticism unspoken but evident. Mabel countered the murmurs at the hate diner later that day, her voice fierce as she defended Bella's worth. Emily's initial assessment was grim, multiple fractures, internal bleeding and hypothermia, but Bella's pulse held strong, a testament to her resilience. She looked at Tom, her hazel eyes steady, as she outlined the next steps: a transfer to her clinic for emergency surgery. No guarantees, but a fighting chance. Tom nodded, his voice lost in the weight of the moment, his hand never leaving Bella's side. The helicopter's departure marked a shift, the rescue attempt complete, but the battle for Bella's life just beginning. Willow Creek's unity tightened, its people drawn together by a dog who'd given them so much, now asking for their strength in return. The late morning sun cast long shadows over Willow Creek as the rescue helicopter's roar faded, leaving a tense hush at the Raven's Crest trailhead. Tom Harper knelt beside Bella, his 68-year-old frame trembling with a mix of relief and dread as he stroked his border collie's matted black and white fur. At 7 years old, Bella was a shadow of the vibrant search and rescue dog who'd once bounded through the Cascades, her body now broken from a 20-foot fall into the ravine's shallow stream after days on a crumbling ledge. Her amber eyes flickered with faint recognition, her breathing shallow but persistent, a testament to the resilience that had saved countless lives. Tom's weathered face was etched with new lines, his grey hair damp with sweat and mist, his blue eyes locked on Bella as if his gaze could will her to survive. Willow Creek, a town of 2,500 nestled in Washington's rugged mountains, buzzed with the news of Bella's rescue, its residents crowding the trailhead, their murmurs a blend of hope and concern. Dr. Emily Carter worked with clinical precision at her triage station, her silver-streaked hair pulled tight as she assessed Bella's injuries, her hazel eyes betraying the gravity of the moment. At 45, she'd seen her share of trauma cases, but Bella's condition tested even her seasoned resolve. Jake Sullivan stood nearby, his 30-year-old frame, battered from his reckless descent to save Bella, his sun-bleached hair streaked with mud, his hands still shaking from the effort. Margaret Hayes watched from the edge of the crowd, her pearl necklace glinting as she clutched her purse, her elegant facade hiding the financial strain of funding the rescue equipment. The community's unity held firm, but the weight of Bella's survival now rested on Emily's clinic, a converted barn on the town's outskirts, where the fight for Bella's life would unfold. The transfer to the clinic was a blur of urgent movement, volunteers clearing a path as Jake and Tom carried Bella's stretcher to Emily's van, its rear doors open to reveal a makeshift medical bay. Tom rode beside Bella, his hand resting on her head, whispering memories of their hikes with Ellen, his late wife whose absence still carved a hollow in his chest. The clinic's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows as Bella was wheeled into the examination room, its walls lined with photos of animals Emily had saved. Emily's team, a veterinary technician named Lisa, and a young assistant, moved in sync preparing surgical tools and monitors while Emily conducted her initial assessment. Her voice was steady as she catalogued Bella's injuries aloud, multiple. Fractures in the ribs and right hind leg, severe bruising along the spine, probable internal bleeding from abdominal distension, hypothermia, from exposure and dehydration, evident in her sunken eyes and sluggish pulse. Tom stood in the corner, his tall frame seeming to shrink as the list grew, his firefighter's discipline clashing with the raw fear of losing Bella. Emily removed her stethoscope, her expression grim as she met Tom's gaze, the silence broken only by the clock's relentless ticking. "The kindest option might be to let her go," she said, her words careful but unflinching. "The extent of these injuries makes meaningful recovery unlikely even with surgery." Tom's breath caught his mind reeling at the thought of another loss after Ellen's death a year ago. Bella was his family, her loyalty, the anchor that had kept him afloat through endless nights of grief. Jake stepped forward, his voice rough with emotion. "You can't give up on her, not after everything she's done." He recounted the wildfire 2 years ago, when Bella found him trapped in a collapsed shed, her barks guiding rescuers through smoke and flame. "She saved my life," he said, his hands still streaked with Bella's blood from carrying her out of the ravine. "We owe her a chance." Margaret entered the room, her presence unexpected, her tailored coat at odds with the clinical setting. "News travels fast in Willow Creek," she said, her cultured voice steady. "I'll cover the medical costs, whatever it takes." Emily's eyebrows rose. The surgery alone could run tens of thousands, not counting rehabilitation and specialized care. Margaret nodded, undeterred, her face revealing none of the overdraft notices piling up at home. "Bella deserves this," she said, her tone final, though only she knew the personal cost a second mortgage on her Victorian home to fund her generosity. Tom found his voice, his words quiet but resolute. "I'll sell the house if I have to. She's all I have left." Emily looked between them, her professional judgment warring with the raw emotion in the room. Against her better instincts, she felt her resolve shift. "I'll need to call in specialists and equipment we don't have here," she warned. "There are no guarantees." "Just try Tom," whispered, his hand resting on Bella's still form. The decision made, Emily sprang into action, her team prepping Bella for emergency surgery to address the internal bleeding and stabilize her fractures. Volunteers transformed the clinic's waiting area into a support hub, bringing coffee and blankets for Tom, who refused to leave. Jake stayed too, his climbing gear piled in a corner as he fielded calls from the trailhead team updating the community. Clara Nguyen arrived, her notebook open, as she documented the unfolding drama, her latest Chronicle article, framing Bella's fight as a test of Willow Creek's spirit. The town responded with fervor, the diner's donation jar overflowing, the elementary school delivering a stack of Get Well cards, their crayon drawings taped to the clinic walls. Yet skepticism lingered, Harold, the council member, speaking at the community center about the financial burden of Bella's care, his words sparking arguments with those who saw her as a hero. Mabel countered at the diner, her voice fierce as she recounted Bella's rescues, swaying a few doubters. Outside the clinic, a small crowd gathered, their opinions as varied as their backgrounds, some praying for Bella's recovery, others muttering about the cost of saving one dog. Inside, Emily worked with grim determination, the surgery stretching into hours as she repaired torn vessels and set shattered bones. Tom sat in the waiting room, his hands clasped around Ellen's worn photo, speaking softly to her about Bella's courage. Jake paced nearby, his debt to Bella, a weight he carried in every glance at the operating room door. Margaret returned with dinner for the staff, her homemade soup, a gesture of solidarity, though her thoughts lingered on her dwindling savings. The surgery concluded with cautious optimism, Emily emerging sweat-soaked, but steady. Bella survived the procedure, she said, her voice hoarse. The next 24 hours are critical. Tom nodded, his eyes red-rimmed as he followed her to see Bella. The sight of his dog intubated and surrounded by monitors nearly broke him, her powerful frame reduced to a fragile shell. He pulled a chair beside her kennel, his voice soft, as he spoke of Ellen's love for her, how she'd scold Bella for stealing socks but never stayed mad. Bella's chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, her eyes closed, but her presence enough to keep Tom anchored. The community's support surged, donations arriving from neighboring towns inspired by Clara's articles. A veterinary specialist from Seattle offered to consult pro bono, her expertise a lifeline for Bella's complex injuries. Yet the road ahead was daunting, Emily, warning of potential complications, infection, spinal damage, permanent mobility loss. Tom absorbed the risks, his firefighter's pragmatism, tempered by a love that defied logic. Jake vowed to help with Bella's care, his wilderness guide skills useless in the clinic, but his loyalty unwavering. Margaret faced her own crisis, her financial advisor warning of foreclosure, but she pushed the thought aside, focused on Bella's fight. Willow Creek stood at a crossroads, its unity tested by the cost of hope, but strengthened by the shared belief in Bella's worth. The clinic hummed with quiet activity, volunteers staffing phones, residents dropping off supplies, the town's heart beating in rhythm with Bella's fragile pulse. The 6th day in Willow Creek dawned with a fragile optimism, the Cascade Mountains, standing resolute under a sky dappled with clouds that cast fleeting shadows over the town of 2,500. Tom Harper sat beside Bella's kennel in Dr. Emily Carter's veterinary clinic, his 68-year-old frame hunched from exhaustion, but unyielding. In its vigil, his gray hair was disheveled, his blue eyes red-rimmed as he watched his 7-year-old border collie breathe under sedation, her black and white coat cleaned of ravine mud, but marred by bandages and an IV line. Bella's survival through emergency. Surgery was a miracle. Her fractured ribs and hind legs stabilized, her internal bleeding stemmed, but the road to recovery loomed steep and uncertain. Tom's weathered hands rested on the kennel bars, his firefighter's discipline holding grief at bay. As he whispered to Bella about their hikes with Ellen, his late wife, whose absence still echoed in his quiet house. Willow Creek pulsed with a complex energy, its residents grappling with Bella's fight as both a unifying cause and a point of contention. The clinic, a converted barn on the town's edge, had become a beacon of hope, its parking lot crowded with volunteers and well-wishers, their faces a mix of determination and doubt. Dr. Emily. Carter moved between Bella's kennel and her office, her silver-streaked hair escaping its bun, her hazel eyes sharp, despite the strain of overseeing Bella's care. At 45, she balanced clinical precision with empathy, her reputation for saving hopeless cases now tested by Bella's fragile state. Jake Sullivan lingered nearby, his 30-year-old frame restless, his sun-bleached hair tucked under a cap, his hands still marked by cuts from his ravine descent to save Bella. Margaret Hayes arrived with a tray of pastries, her pearl necklace, a constant as she navigated the crowd, her elegant demeanor hiding the financial peril of her generosity. The town's response to Bella's crisis had split its heart, exposing fault lines of loyalty and pragmatism that defined its character. At the Main Street diner, Mabel's donation jar overflowed with coins and bills, each clink a vote for Bella's. Survivors regulars shared stories of her rescues, from finding lost hikers to alerting families during floods. The diner's walls were plastered with children's drawings from the elementary school, their crayon renditions of Bella, a vibrant testament to her place in the community. Clara Nguyen, the local reporter for the Willow Creek Chronicle, scribbled, notes her articles now picked up by Seattle outlets, framing Bella's story as a testament to small-town resilience. The community center buzzed with activity volunteers, sorting blankets and water bottles, their chatter a blend of hope and heated debate. Harold, the council member, led a vocal minority questioning the resources poured into Bella's care, his voice carrying over the center's folding tables as he argued for reallocating funds to storm-damaged infrastructure. His logic resonated, with some a retired logger nodding as he cited the cost of veterinary specialists flown in from Seattle. But Mabel's allies pushed back their voices, rising with stories of Bella's heroism, like the time she located a stranded camper in a blizzard, her barks cutting through the storm. Margaret Hayes watched from the edge of the crowd, her pearl necklace glinting as she clutched her purse, her elegant facade hiding the financial strain of funding the rescue equipment. The community's unity held firm, but the weight of Bella's survival now rested on Emily's clinic, a converted barn on the town's outskirts, where the fight for Bella's life would unfold. The transfer to the clinic was a blur of urgent movement, volunteers clearing a path as Jake and Tom carried Bella's stretcher to Emily's van, its rear doors open to reveal a makeshift medical bay. Tom rode beside Bella, his hand resting on her head, whispering memories of their hikes with Ellen, his late wife, whose absence still carved a hollow in his chest. The clinic's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows as Bella was wheeled into the examination room, its walls lined with photos of animals Emily had saved. Emily's team, a veterinary technician named Lisa, and a young assistant, moved in sync, preparing surgical tools and monitors while Emily conducted her initial assessment. Her voice was steady as she catalogued Bella's injuries aloud, multiple. Fractures in the ribs and right hind leg, severe bruising along the spine, probable internal bleeding from abdominal distension, hypothermia, from exposure and dehydration, evident in her sunken eyes and sluggish pulse. Tom stood in the corner, his tall frame seeming to shrink as the list grew, his firefighter's discipline clashing with the raw fear of losing Bella. Emily removed her stethoscope, her expression grim as she met Tom's gaze, the silence broken only by the clock's relentless ticking. "The kindest option might be to let her go," she said, her words careful but unflinching. "The extent of these injuries makes meaningful recovery unlikely even with surgery." Tom's breath caught his mind, reeling at the thought of another loss after Ellen's death a year ago. Bella was his family, her loyalty, the anchor that had kept him afloat through endless nights of grief. Jake stepped forward, his voice rough with emotion. "You can't give up on her, not after everything she's done." He recounted the wildfire 2 years ago, when Bella found him trapped in a collapsed shed, her barks guiding rescuers through smoke and flame. "She saved my life," he said, his hands still streaked with Bella's blood from carrying her out of the ravine. "We owe her a chance." Margaret entered the room, her presence unexpected, her tailored coat at odds with the clinical setting. "News travels fast in Willow Creek," she said, her cultured voice steady. "I'll cover the medical costs, whatever it takes." Emily's eyebrows rose. The surgery alone could run tens of thousands, not counting rehabilitation and specialized care. Margaret nodded, undeterred, her face revealing none of the overdraft notices piling up at home. Bella deserves this, she said, her tone final, though only she knew the personal cost a second mortgage on her Victorian home to fund her generosity. Tom found his voice, his words quiet but resolute. I'll sell the house if I have to. She's all. I have left. Emily looked between them, her professional judgment warring with the raw emotion in the room. Against her better instincts, she felt her resolve shift. I'll need to call in specialists and equipment we don't have here, she warned. There are no guarantees. Just try Tom, whispered, his hand resting on Bella's still form. The decision made, Emily sprang into action, her team prepping Bella for emergency surgery to address the internal bleeding and stabilize her fractures. Volunteers transformed the clinic's waiting area into a support hub, bringing coffee and blankets for Tom, who refused to leave. Jake stayed too, his climbing gear piled in a corner as he fielded calls from the trailhead team updating the community. Clara Nguyen arrived, her notebook open, as she documented the unfolding drama, her latest Chronicle article, framing Bella's fight as a test of Willow Creek's spirit. The town responded with fervor, the diner's donation jar overflowing, the elementary school delivering a stack of get-well cards, their crayon drawings taped to the clinic walls. Yet skepticism lingered, Harold, the council member, speaking at the community center about the financial burden of Bella's care, his words sparking arguments with those who saw her as a hero. Mabel countered at the diner, her voice fierce as she recounted Bella's rescues, swaying a few doubters. Outside the clinic, a small crowd gathered, their opinions as varied as their backgrounds, some praying for Bella's recovery, others muttering about the cost of saving one dog. Inside, Emily worked with grim determination, the surgery stretching into hours as she repaired torn vessels and set shattered bones. Tom sat in the waiting room, his hands clasped around Ellen's worn photo, speaking softly to her about Bella's courage. Jake paced nearby, his debt to Bella, a weight he carried in every glance at the operating room door. Margaret returned with dinner for the staff, her homemade soup, a gesture of solidarity, though her thoughts lingered on her dwindling savings. The surgery concluded with cautious optimism, Emily emerging sweat-soaked, but steady. Bella survived the procedure, she said, her voice hoarse. The next 24 hours are critical. Tom nodded, his eyes red-rimmed as he followed her to see Bella. The sight of his dog intubated and surrounded by monitors nearly broke him, her powerful frame reduced to a fragile shell. He pulled a chair beside her kennel, his voice soft, as he spoke of Ellen's love for her, how she'd scold Bella for stealing socks but never stayed mad. Bella's chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, her eyes closed, but her presence enough to keep Tom anchored. The community's support surged, donations arriving from neighboring towns inspired by Clara's articles. A veterinary specialist from Seattle offered to consult pro bono, her expertise a lifeline for Bella's complex injuries. Yet the road ahead was daunting, Emily, warning of potential complications, infection, spinal damage, permanent mobility loss. Tom absorbed the risks, his firefighter's pragmatism, tempered by a love that defied logic. Jake vowed to help with Bella's care, his wilderness guide skills useless in the clinic, but his loyalty unwavering. Margaret faced her own crisis, her financial advisor warning of foreclosure, but she pushed the thought aside, focused on Bella's fight. Willow Creek stood at a crossroads, its unity tested by the cost of hope, but strengthened by the shared belief in Bella's worth. The clinic hummed with quiet activity, volunteers staffing phones, residents dropping off supplies, the town's heart beating in rhythm with Bella's fragile pulse. The sixth day in Willow Creek dawned with a fragile optimism, the Cascade Mountains, standing resolute under a sky dappled with clouds that cast fleeting shadows over the town of 2,500. Tom Harper sat beside Bella's kennel in Dr. Emily Carter's veterinary clinic, his 68-year-old frame hunched from exhaustion, but unyielding. In its vigil, his gray hair was disheveled, his blue eyes red-rimmed as he watched his 7-year-old border collie breathe under sedation, her black and white coat cleaned of ravine mud, but marred by bandages and an IV line. Bella's survival through emergency. Surgery was a miracle. Her fractured ribs and hind legs stabilized, her internal bleeding stemmed, but the road to recovery loomed steep and uncertain. Tom's weathered hands rested on the kennel bars, his firefighter's discipline holding grief at bay. As he whispered to Bella about their hikes with Ellen, his late wife, whose absence still echoed in his quiet house. Willow Creek pulsed with a complex energy, its residents grappling with Bella's fight as both a unifying cause and a point of contention. The clinic, a converted barn on the town's edge, had become a beacon of hope, its parking lot crowded with volunteers and well-wishers, their faces a mix of determination and doubt. Dr. Emily Carter moved between Bella's kennel and her office, her silver-streaked hair escaping its bun, her hazel eyes sharp, despite the strain of overseeing Bella's care. At 45, she balanced clinical precision with empathy, her reputation for saving hopeless cases now tested by Bella's fragile state. Jake Sullivan lingered nearby, his 30-year-old frame restless, his sun-bleached hair tucked under a cap, his hands still marked by cuts from his ravine descent to save Bella. Margaret Hayes arrived with a tray of pastries, her pearl necklace, a constant as she navigated the crowd, her elegant demeanor hiding the financial peril of her generosity. The town's response to Bella's crisis had split its heart, exposing fault lines of loyalty and pragmatism that defined its character. At the Main Street diner, Mabel's donation jar overflowed with coins and bills, each clink a vote for Bella's. Survivors regulars shared stories of her rescues, from finding lost hikers to alerting families during floods. The diner's walls were plastered with children's drawings from the elementary school, their crayon renditions of Bella, a vibrant testament to her place in the community. Clara Nguyen, the local reporter for the Willow Creek Chronicle, scribbled notes, her articles now picked up by Seattle outlets, framing Bella's story as a testament to small-town resilience. The community center buzzed with activity volunteers, sorting blankets and water bottles, their chatter a blend of hope and heated debate. Harold, the council member, led a vocal minority questioning the resources poured into Bella's care, his voice carrying over the center's folding tables as he argued for reallocating funds to storm-damaged infrastructure. His logic resonated, with some a retired logger nodding as he cited the cost of veterinary specialists flown in from Seattle. But Mabel's allies pushed back their voices, rising with stories of Bella's heroism, like the time she located a stranded camper in a blizzard, her barks cutting through the storm. The town's support surged in response, a local pet store donating a custom mobility harness, a veterinary nutritionist offering tailored meal plans for Bella's recovery. The elementary school's Get Well cards grew into a scrapbook delivered to Tom by a shy third grader, her earnest hope you feel better, Mr. Harper, breaking his stoic facade. At the diner, Mabel hung a new banner. Bella's comeback begins its letters, bold against the skepticism that persisted. Harold's allies rallied at the community center, their arguments gaining traction as budget deadlines loomed a shop owner, citing the clinic's strain on municipal resources. But the tide of support held strong, a firefighter recounting Bella's gas leak rescue at a radio call-in show, swaying callers who'd wavered. The clinic's vigil grew nightly, residents lighting candles, their prayers and debates mingling in the crisp air. Some who doubted, like the hardware store owner, now joined the supporters, his flashlight donation a quiet apology. Others remained, steadfast, a mechanic arguing at the diner that human needs trumped a dog's care, his words sparking a shouting match Mabel swiftly quelled. Tom's nightly ritual of reading Ellen's poetry to Bella continued, his voice a steady cadence against the monitor's hum. He spoke of their shared winters. Bella curled by the hearth, Ellen's laughter filling the house. Bella's responses grew stronger, a faint paw twitch, a soft huff of breath, each a step toward recovery. Emily adjusted her treatment plan, adding anti-inflammatory drugs and increasing hydrotherapy sessions, her team bolstered by a Seattle specialist who arrived with advanced imaging tools. The scans showed healing fractures, but also spinal swelling, a risk Emily monitored closely. She shared each update with Tom and Jake, her honesty tempered by encouragement. Bella's resilience is extraordinary, she said. If she keeps this up, we might avoid surgical complications. Jake took the news as a call to action, organizing a community fundraiser to offset clinic costs, his flyers rivaling Tom's in their reach. Margaret considered selling her last major asset, a family painting, but hesitated, her identity tied to the legacy she'd maintained since her husband's death. Clara's articles began exploring the town's divide, her questions probing what Bella's fight revealed about Willow Creek's values. The library's bulletin board became a debate forum, notes of support pinned beside critiques of misplaced priorities. At the clinic, volunteers rotated shifts, their dedication a counterpoint to the town's tension. A retired nurse offered to monitor Bella overnight, her gentle hands easing Tom's guilt when he returned home to shower. The community's support was a lifeline, donations funding a new oxygen monitor, the school's scrapbook a daily boost for Tom's morale. Yet the opposition stung Harold's faction, planning a public forum to challenge the council's spending. Emily navigated the pressure, her updates to the community measured but hopeful, Bella's progress a fragile bridge between hope and doubt. Jake countered the skeptics with a vigil at the town square, its candles a silent rebuke to those who saw Bella as expendable. Margaret faced her financial ruin in private, her contributions a secret sacrifice for a dog who'd stirred her dormant purpose. Tom clung to Bella's small victories, her tail wag, her steady gaze, each a promise of the life they could reclaim. Willow Creek's heart beat unevenly, its unity tested by Bella's fight, but strengthened by the glimmers of progress that refused to fade. The 20th day in Willow Creek shimmered with a deceptive calm, the Cascade Mountains framing a town of 2,500 souls teetering between hope and a new shadow of doubt. Tom Harper sat by Bella's kennel in Dr. Emily Carter's veterinary clinic, his 68-year-old frame etched with exhaustion, his grey hair matted from restless nights spent on a cot nearby. His blue eyes, once sharp with a firefighter's focus, now flickered with worry as he watched his 7-year-old border collie struggle against a sudden decline. Bella's black and white coat, though cleaned and bandaged, seemed duller, her breathing labored despite the steady hum of monitors. 2 weeks of progress, her tail wags, her strengthening limbs had fueled Tom's belief in her recovery, but now her amber eyes were clouded, her body listless in the wake of a resistant infection that had struck without warning. Tom's weathered hands gripped Ellen's worn photo, his late wife's smile a fading anchor as he whispered to Bella about their summer hikes, her joyous leaps into mountain streams. Willow Creek pulsed with a fractured energy, its residents caught in the emotional whiplash of Bella's setback, their support now tested by a revelation that would redefine her fight. Dr. Emily Carter moved with urgent precision, her silver-streaked hair escaping its bun, her hazel eyes narrowed as she reviewed lab results at 45, her expertise strained by this unexpected blow. Jake Sullivan paced the clinic's waiting room, his 30-year-old frame taut with frustration, his sun-bleached hair disheveled, his hands clenching as he grappled with Bella's relapse. Margaret Hayes stood quietly in the corner, her pearl necklace a constant as she delivered a thermos of soup, her elegant facade crumbling under the weight of her near bankruptcy. The town's commitment to Bella had woven a tapestry of devotion, but the infection and a chilling discovery about its cause threatened to unravel it. The clinic, a converted barn on Willow Creek's edge, was a hive of activity, volunteers rotating, shifts, their faces heavy with concern as they sorted dwindling supplies. At the Main Street diner, Mabel's donation jar still clinked with contributions, but the fervor had waned, replaced by murmurs of doubt as Bella's condition faltered. Clara Nguyen's articles in the Willow Creek Chronicle now carried a somber tone. Her latest piece, A Hero's Struggle, takes a dark turn, hinting at a mystery that had yet to break. The community center's debates grew sharper, Harold's faction gaining ground as they argued the mounting costs of Bella's care, now estimated at over $50,000, were unsustainable. Yet Mabel's allies held firm, their voices rising, with stories of Bella's rescues like the blizzard 3 years ago when she led a stranded family to safety. Tom's world remained anchored to Bella's kennel, where the setback had begun 2 days prior, with a fever that spiked despite antibiotics. Emily had noticed Bella's lethargy during a hydrotherapy session, her once steady limbs trembling, her appetite gone. Blood tests confirmed a rare bacterial infection resistant to standard treatments, its rapid spread threatening her healing fractures and weakened organs. Emily's voice was steady, but grave as she briefed Tom and Jake. "We're dealing with something Unusual, she said, her fingers tracing lab data. This strain isn't typical for environmental exposure. It's almost like she ingested something toxic. Tom's heart sank, his mind flashing to the ravine's shallow stream where Bella had landed after her fall. Jake's jaw tightened, his wilderness guide instincts kicking in as he recalled the stream's odd sheen, a detail he'd dismissed in the chaos of the rescue. Emily ordered advanced toxicology screens. Her suspicion confirmed when results showed traces of a synthetic toxin in Bella's blood, a chemical linked to industrial pesticides not naturally occurring in the Cascades. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Bella's fall might not have been an accident. Clara caught wind of the findings, her reporter's instincts driving her to dig deeper. She interviewed Emily off the record, piecing together a theory that sent her to the sheriff's office with questions about recent activity near Raven's Crest. The trailhead, though remote, was near a contested logging zone where illegal operations had been rumored for months. Clara's inquiries uncovered reports of unmarked trucks and chemical barrels spotted in the area, whispers of loggers using toxic bait to deter wildlife and search dogs that might expose their work. The possibility that Bella had been targeted shook the town, its implications rippling through the clinic and beyond. Tom's grief turned to anger, his firefighter's sense of justice flaring at the thought of someone harming Bella. He sat by her kennel, his voice low as he promised to find the truth, his words mingling with memories of Ellen's fierce protectiveness. Jake took the news as a call to action, his debt to Bella from the wildfire rescue, fueling his resolve to investigate the logging site. He met with Clara at the diner, their conversation hushed as they pored over maps and sheriff's reports. Margaret overheard their talk, her presence at the diner a rare departure from her usual discretion. The revelation stirred her dormant sense of purpose, her financial ruin secondary to the injustice of Bella's suffering. She pledged to fund a private investigator, her voice steady, despite the bank's latest foreclosure threat. The town's response was a mix of outrage and division, the diner buzzing with theories about the loggers. Mabel hung a new banner, Justice for Bella, its letters bold against the growing skepticism. Harold's faction seized on the toxin angle, arguing it proved the futility of Bella's care, their council meeting, drawing a larger crowd as they pushed for budget cuts. But the news also galvanized support, a Seattle environmental group offering to test the ravine's water, a local lawyer volunteering to pursue legal action against the loggers. The elementary school students sent a new batch of cards, their messages now urging Bella to stay strong against the bad people. Clara's next article broke the story, illegal logging, linked to Bella's poisoning, its words igniting regional attention and prompting a sheriff's investigation. At the clinic, Emily adjusted Bella's treatment, targeting the infection with a cocktail of experimental antibiotics flown in from a Portland lab. The drugs showed early promise, Bella's fever dropping slightly by the second day, her breathing less strained. Volunteers rallied to assist with her care, a retired nurse adjusting IVs, a teenager cleaning her bedding, their dedication a counterpoint to the town's unrest. Tom's nightly ritual of reading Ellen's poetry grew fiercer, his voice a vow to fight for Bella's justice as much as her life. Jake scouted the logging site with a sheriff's deputy, finding traces of chemical residue that matched Bella's toxicology report. The evidence was circumstantial but damning, pointing to a rogue logging crew operating beyond legal permits. Margaret faced her financial reckoning, her advisor warning that her latest donation had triggered a bank audit, but she brushed it aside, her focus on Bella's faint progress, a paw twitch, a soft huff of breath. Clara's reporting drew a crowd to the town square, where Jake organized a vigil, its candles a silent protest against the loggers' cruelty. The community center's debates grew heated, a firefighter clashing with Harold over Bella's worth, the room dividing along lines of heart and logic. At the diner, Mabel countered the skeptics with stories of Bella's flood rescue swaying a few waverers. The library's bulletin board became a war of words, notes of support pinned beside calls for fiscal restraint. Emily's updates were cautious but hopeful. The antibiotics gaining ground, though spinal swelling remained a concern. Tom clung to each small victory, Bella's eyes opening briefly, her gaze meeting his with the spark of the dog he knew. Jake's. Investigation pushed forward his findings, strengthening the sheriff's case against the loggers. Margaret considered selling her home to sustain her contributions, her legacy now tied to Bella's fight. Willow Creek stood at a precipice, its unity strained by Bella's setback and the toxin's dark truth, but fortified by the glimmers of recovery and the pursuit of justice that refused to falter. The 30th day in Willow Creek dawned with a quiet resolve, the Cascade Mountains, standing as steadfast witnesses to a town of 2,500 souls navigating the twin currents of justice and healing. Tom Harper sat beside Bella's kennel in Dr. Emily Carter's veterinary clinic, his 68-year-old, frame softened by a cautious hope that had taken root despite weeks of anguish. His grey hair was neatly combed for the first time in days, his blue eyes brighter as he watched his 7-year-old border collie shift in her sleep, her black and white coat regaining a faint sheen under the clinic's lights. Bella's battle against a toxin-induced infection had turned a corner. Her fever broken her breathing steady as experimental antibiotics clawed back ground from the resistant bacteria. The bandages on her fractured ribs and hind leg were lighter now, her amber eyes opening more often, with glints of the alertness that had defined her search and rescue days. Tom's weathered hands held Ellen's worn photo, his late wife's smile, a steady beacon as he spoke to Bella about their future hikes promising quieter trails and extra treats. Willow Creek thrummed with a renewed unity, its residents galvanized by the revelation of illegal logging, and Bella's incremental recovery a dual fight that had reshaped their fractured community. Dr. Emily Carter moved with renewed energy, her silver-streaked hair tied back, her hazel eyes scanning Bella's charts with guarded optimism. At 45, her expertise had carried Bella through the darkest days. Jake Sullivan stood at the clinic's entrance, his 30-year-old frame relaxed for the first time in weeks, his sun-bleached hair free of his usual cap, his hands steady as he shared updates from the sheriff's investigation. Margaret Hayes arrived with a basket of scones, her pearl necklace glinting as she greeted volunteers, her financial ruin, now an open secret, but her spirit unbroken. The town's response to Bella's crisis had evolved from division to a shared purpose fueled by justice for her poisoning and hope for her survival. The clinic, a converted barn on Willow Creek's edge, buzzed with volunteers, their faces alight with purpose, as they sorted fresh donations from antiseptic to dog beds. At the Main Street diner, Mabel's donation jar had been replaced by a fund for Bella's ongoing care, its totals climbing as regional donors joined the cause, inspired by Clara Nguyen's viral articles in the Willow Creek Chronicle. Clara's latest piece, Justice for Bella, a town's redemption, detailed the logging scandal, its words spurring action beyond the town's borders. The community center, once a battleground for Harold's budget debates, now hosted planning sessions for Bella's rehabilitation, its tables covered with maps and legal documents. Harold's faction had quieted their arguments, losing steam as evidence of the loggers' crimes mounted. Tom's focus remained on Bella, his days spent by her side, his firefighters' discipline now a quiet strength as he celebrated her small victories. Emily's latest update was a turning point. The infection's retreat confirmed by blood tests, the spinal swelling reduced enough to avoid further surgery. Bella stood for the first time on day 28, her legs wobbly, but supported by a custom mobility harness donated by a Portland pet company. The moment drew cheers from volunteers, Tom's eyes welling as Bella's tail wagged with a vigor he hadn't seen since before the fall. Emily introduced targeted physical therapy, moving Bella's limbs in slow arcs to rebuild muscle, her hands gentle but firm as Bella huffed in protest. Jake assisted with the sessions, his wilderness guide, strength now lifting Bella into a hydrotherapy tub, where she floated, her eyes brightening at the water's warmth. Margaret watched these sessions, her presence a quiet pillar, though her Victorian home was now on the market, its sale a final act to fund Bella's care. The pursuit of justice gained momentum, Jake and Clara working with Sheriff Daniels to build a case against the rogue logging crew. Jake's scouting of the Raven's Crest site had uncovered chemical barrels hidden in a gully, their labels matching the toxin in Bella's blood. The sheriff's team raided the logging camp on day 25, arresting 3 men who confessed to using pesticide-laced bait to deter search dogs, a desperate bid to hide their illegal clear-cutting. The evidence was ironclad tire tracks chemical, residue and a burner phone linking the crew to a larger syndicate. Clara's reporting broke the story, its impact reaching Seattle newsrooms and prompting a state investigation into logging permits. The arrests were a triumph for Willow Creek, its residents gathering at the town square to celebrate the news, their candles now symbols of justice as much as hope. Mabel hung a new banner at the diner. Bella's victory begins its letters, a rallying cry that drew applause from regulars. The elementary school students sent a new scrapbook, their drawings now depicting Bella chasing the bad guys, a child's vision of her heroism. The community's support surged, a Seattle environmental group funding water tests that confirmed the ravine's contamination, a local lawyer filing a class action suit against the logging company. Yet the victory was bittersweet, the toxins' toll on Bella a reminder of the cost. Emily adjusted her treatment plan, adding liver support to counter the pesticide's lingering effects, her team bolstered by a toxicologist who arrived with specialized protocols. Bella's progress was steady. She took her first unaided steps on day 29, a shaky journey across the clinic floor that ended with her collapsing into Tom's arms. The moment was captured by Clara's camera, its image gracing the chronicles. Front page, a symbol of resilience that quieted even Harold's staunchest allies. Tom's nightly ritual of reading Ellen's poetry grew lighter, his voice now weaving tales of Bella's future. As a therapy dog, a dream inspired by her gentle response to volunteers. Jake organized a community fundraiser to support Bella's rehab, its proceeds covering a new therapy pool. His debt to her from the wildfire rescue now a lifelong commitment. Margaret faced her financial ruin with Grace, her home sale pending, but her legacy secured through the Bella Harper Fund, a trust she'd established for injured service animals. The community center's debates shifted to celebration of firefighter, recounting Bella's flood rescue to a packed room, Harold conceding the town's unity with a reluctant nod. At the diner, Mabel hosted a justice party, its tables crowded with residents sharing stories of Bella's service. The library's bulletin board overflowed with notes of gratitude, some from skeptics who'd crossed the divide inspired by the arrests and Bella's steps. Clara's interviews captured the town's transformation, her questions probing how Bella's fight had redefined Willow Creek's heart. The clinic hummed with quiet joy, volunteers decorating Bella's recovery area with flowers, their shifts, now a privilege rather than a chore. A retired nurse taught Tom how to massage Bella's joints, her hands guiding his with care. The community's support was a lifeline, donations funding, advanced imaging to monitor Bella's spine, the school's scrapbook, a daily boost for Tom's morale. Yet challenges remained, Emily warning of potential nerve damage that could limit Bella's mobility. Tom absorbed the risks, his love for Bella outweighing the uncertainty. Jake's investigation continued his findings, aiding a federal probe into the logging syndicate. Margaret began rebuilding her life, renting a modest apartment, her pride intact. As she planned the fund's launch, Willow Creek's unity solidified, its residents no longer divided, but bound by a shared victory, the arrests a vindication, the recovery a miracle. Bella's faint barks returned on day 30, a soft sound that echoed through the clinic, drawing smiles from all who heard. Tom clung to her progress, her steady gaze, her wobbly steps, each a promise of the life they'd reclaimed together, a testament to a town that refused to let her fall. The 40th day in Willow Creek bloomed with a radiant warmth, the Cascade Mountains cradling a town of 2,500 souls, now transformed by a journey from loss to redemption. Tom Harper stood on the porch of his cedar-shingled house, his 68-year-old, frame steadier than it had been in weeks, his grey hair catching the morning sun as he watched Bella limp toward her red, squeaky toy. His 7-year-old border collie, her black and white coat gleaming despite faint scars, moved with a cautious grace. Her fractured ribs and hind leg healed enough to bear her weight, aided by a custom mobility harness that hugged her frame. Bella's amber eyes sparkled with the same spirit that had defined her search and rescue days, her soft barks a joyful echo after weeks of silence in Dr. Emily Carter's clinic. Tom's blue eyes, once dulled by grief, now shone with quiet pride, his weathered hands clutching Ellen's worn photo, his late wife's smile a constant companion through Bella's fight. Willow Creek had emerged from its crucible of division, its residents united by Bella's survival, and the justice secured against the loggers who poisoned her, a victory that reshaped their collective heart. Dr. Emily Carter arrived at the clinic, her silver-streaked hair loose, her hazel eyes bright, as she prepared for Bella's final checkup at 45. Her expertise had anchored the town's hope. Jake Sullivan jogged down Main Street, his 30-year-old frame energized, his sun-bleached hair free, as he planned a community celebration, his debt to Bella repaid but never forgotten. Margaret Hayes sat in her new apartment, her pearl necklace replaced by a simple chain, her elegance undimmed despite her financial reset, her legacy now tied to a cause greater than herself. The town's transformation was a tapestry of resilience woven from Bella's recovery and the community's unwavering commitment. The clinic, a converted barn, once a battleground of doubt, now stood as a monument to possibility, its walls adorned with children's drawings and thank-you notes. At the Main Street diner, Mabel's new banner read Bella's homecoming, its bold letters a testament to a town that had found its soul. Clara Nguyen's final article in the Willow Creek Chronicle headlined, "A Hero's Return, Willow Creek Reborn," captured the story's end, its words syndicated across Washington state. The community center hosted planning sessions for a service animal fund, its tables now symbols of unity rather than debate. Harold's faction had dissolved their skepticism, swept away by Bella's wobbly steps and the loggers' arrests. Tom's days were filled with Bella's rehabilitation, his firefighter's discipline now a gentle guide as he helped her navigate the yard. Emily's final exam on day 39 confirmed Bella's fractures had healed, the infection eradicated, though nerve damage left her gait uneven, a challenge she met with stubborn resolve. Bella returned home that evening, her harness a gift from a Portland donor, allowing her to explore the grass, her nose twitching at familiar scents. Tom knelt beside her, his voice soft as he spoke of Ellen's pride, promising shorter walks and longer naps. The moment was a quiet triumph witnessed by Jake, who'd driven them home, his grin wide as Bella nosed her old toy. Emily had prescribed ongoing therapy, including weekly hydrotherapy sessions at the clinic, where volunteers still gathered their roles, now a cherished routine. Jake took on Bella's training, adapting her search and rescue skills to a new purpose. As a therapy dog, his wilderness guide instincts shaping exercises that rebuilt her confidence. He organized a town festival to mark Bella's homecoming, its proceeds funding the Bella Harper Fund, a trust Margaret had established for injured service animals. Margaret's transformation was profound, her Victorian home sold to settle debts, her new apartment modest but filled with purpose. She'd launched the fund with the proceeds donating the last of her antiques to ensure its longevity, her pride no longer tied to wealth, but to impact. The fund's first grant went to a retired police dog in Seattle, its success a quiet vindication for Margaret's sacrifices. Clara's reporting chronicled the fund's launch, her interviews with Margaret, revealing a woman reborn through service, her story softening even the hardest skeptics. The town's unity was palpable, the diner crowded with residents sharing stories of Bella's returned neighbors stopping Tom on the street to pet her. The elementary school hosted a welcome-back party, its students presenting Bella with a handmade collar, their cheers ringing as she wagged her tail. The library's bulletin board now displayed fund updates, its notes a chorus of gratitude no longer divided by doubt. At the community center, a firefighter recounted Bella's flood rescue to new volunteers, his words inspiring sign-ups for the fund's board. Mabel's diner became a hub for fundraisers, its walls lined with photos of Bella's recovery, a visual timeline of Willow Creek's journey. The community's support extended beyond Bella, a Seattle rehab center offering free consults for the fund's beneficiaries, a local lawyer securing pro bono work for its legal needs. Yet challenges lingered, Emily warning that Bella's nerve damage might limit her stamina. A reality Tom accepted with grace, his love for her unwavering. He began training her as a therapy dog, taking her to the clinic to comfort patients, her gentle presence a balm for those facing their own battles. Jake supported the effort, designing obstacle courses to strengthen Bella's legs, his bond with her a lifelong commitment. Margaret took on a volunteer role with the fund, her financial acumen, guiding its growth, her apartment now a meeting space for its board. Clara's final piece explored the town's transformation, her questions probing how Bella's fight had redefined community, asking residents what they'd learned about sacrifice and hope. The responses were unanimous. Willow Creek was stronger, its heart forged in the fire of Bella's crisis. The diner's donation jar was retired, its funds seeding the trust, the school's scrapbook now a keepsake in Tom's living room. The clinic resumed normal operations, but kept Bella's recovery area as a memorial, its walls a testament to what love and unity could achieve. Tom's nightly ritual shifted. He now spoke to Ellen about Bella's new role, her visits to the elderly home, where residents lit up at her nudge. Bella's barks, though softer, carried the same spirit that had saved lives, her presence a bridge between Tom's grief and his renewed purpose. Jake planned hikes with Bella, adapting trails to her harness, his laughter filling the air as she chased sticks with cautious glee. Margaret found peace in her smaller life, her fund a legacy that outshone her lost wealth, her smile genuine as she greeted volunteers. The community center hosted a fund gala, its tables crowded with donors from across the county, Harold among them, his skepticism replaced by quiet respect. At the diner, Mabel served pie to festival goers, her stories of Bella's service now legends. That bound the town. The library displayed a photo exhibit of Bella's journey, its images drawing visitors from Seattle, inspired by a dog who'd changed a town. Willow Creek's transformation was complete, its residents no longer strangers but family, their unity a living monument to Bella's resilience. Bella herself stood taller each day, her harness a badge of survival, her eyes bright with the promise of new adventures. Tom watched her nap in the sun, his heart full, as he traced Ellen's photo, knowing they'd found their way home together. The town's scars from division and doubt had healed, replaced by a strength that would endure, a legacy of a border collie who taught them to fight, to love, to never let go.